Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Be me. Work for a few years during summers in college as a carny. Work for a strange old man named R. Brilliant man, doctorate in psychology, masters in history from some fancy UK uni. Had a falling out with his family and rage quit his comfy practice life. Became obsessed with the occult. Started a small shop I'd help out with a certain carny circuit. Often had to run his shop because he and his assistant would pull strings and favors to do the wildest shit, do rubbings of old magic formula in the catacombs, spend months in British archives with these books. Serious historian in the States with multiple books documenting magic formulas throughout Europe, intended uses and histories in some very odd places. Really, he used it to fund his state's business. We sold honest to God historically obsessive accurate magic talisman, material, and whatever the hell you wanted. I've seen a real hand of glory up close, out of China that one. If you needed a Merlin square on a parchment of human skin written with your wife blood or some weird shit, yeah, we are your guys. Talismans too. Precious metals and engraved with whatever floats your boat, Kabbalah, Solomon, maybe an archangel sigil or 4 etc. We had a testimonials display. I've seen a lot of people tell us that stuff works. R was next level at runestones, Elder Futhark. Most people throw stones, do a reading, not R. R would do a cold reading on you, which was often already impressive to show you what other people could do using cold reading. Next, he wrote a sequence of words on a piece of paper and stuck it in their pocket. Finally, he did the runes, read the fates. Then asked you to immediately recite a sequence of words. Then pulled out the words he had written down. If it matched up exactly, it was going to come true. It always matched up. I don't know how he did it. His cold reading alone would have made him a ton of money pretending to be a psychic. And we always had a line for R to do his stuff, but he would rarely have time for it. I've never figured out how he did that sentence thing though. Sometimes he'd stare and laugh and say he'd love to know why this was said as he wrote it. Very strange fellow.
This story begins on a cool summer night in the city of Issaquah, Washington in the year of 1989. I was a patrol sergeant on the night shift with a squad of 4 officers. The night had been uneventful until approximately 3 a.m. Myself and an officer I will identify as John responded to an alarm at a business located in an exclusive shopping area known as Gilman Village. It is made up of older homes and buildings that were moved into an area near Issaquah Creek connected by a wooden walkway. Gilman Village is a very popular shopping destination for tourists and locals alike. As a police officer, I enjoyed walking through the complex while working night shift for the exercise and to window shop at the many interesting stores. Receiving alarms at the different businesses throughout Gilman was common and most of the time uneventful, but on this particular night there was nothing common or uneventful about it. John and I responded to the alarm at a business which was then called the Levi Coat Factory. We performed an outer perimeter check of the building and found it to be secure. Dispatch made phone contact with the owner, who declined to respond to allow us to check the interior of the building. John and I returned to the parking lot located on the northwest side of the complex. This is the area where we had parked our patrol units. John and I stood outside and carried on a conversation in the dimly lit parking lot approximately 60 to 70 feet away from the buildings in that portion of the village. The buildings were to my left and to John's right. Both of us noticed an unusual movement near the eaves of one of the buildings. It was a ball of light about the size of a cantaloupe moving slowly from left to right following the area just below the eaves. The light was very intense. We stared at the light until it disappeared around the south side of the building. Goosebumps prevailed. Officer John and I looked at each other, eyes wide open, each asking at the same time, "Did you see that?" What we had seen was strange enough, but nothing compared to what we were about to witness. While we stood and talked about the strange event, our eyes were once again drawn to the northwest corner of the same building, only this time it was the lower corner. A perfect ball of very intense light approximately 1 foot off the ground floated around the corner. The ball was about 4 feet in diameter and once again a perfect sphere. The thing that made me speechless was what I had seen inside the sphere. Walking upright was, for the lack of any other word, a creature walking. The arms swung back and forth and the hands were turned with its fingers pointed to the rear. As the sphere progressed along the side of the building, it went behind bushes that grew in between the sphere and the parking lot. The light was visible through the openings of the bush, and it was very clear that it was not being projected. As I recall, at least a full 3 minutes passed before either John or I could speak. To put it lightly, we were terrorized by the unknown. This event changed the way I think and look at stories by others claiming encounters with the unknown. John and I never spoke about the event until 2010.
When I was in college, I worked a couple of odd jobs to help pay the bills. They were mostly mundane, but one shook me to my core. I was working for the City Parks and Lakes Division at a local lake. It was a job that did involve some hard work, cleaning and repairing the boats and motors, but it also had more than enough downtime. Whenever there was no work to do, my co-workers and I would sit around in the shade on the dock and talk. When I first started, it was mostly the other guys telling me stories about the lake. Most of them were your run-of-the-mill fisherman stories, but there were a few with a much darker feel. It wasn't long before I started to have my own odd encounters in the park. I split my time working there between the boat dock and working night security in the campgrounds. One night, as I was driving the work truck around the lake into the campgrounds, part of my hourly patrol, I saw a pale blue light just above the road, probably 100 feet in front of my truck. As I got close, the light grew in intensity. Then when I was about 30 feet away, it took on a smoky appearance and dissipated in the night sky. That incident was definitely odd, but not at all in a scary sort of way. The next 2 incidents I had during the night shift, which led to me refusing to work the shift anymore, were definitely more disturbing and physical. Maybe a month after I saw the floating light, I was driving down the hill from the campground back to the lake when I saw a man run out of the bushes. He was dirty, terrified, and wearing only his underwear. The first thought I had was that he was on drugs. The campground was cheap, so we did get our fair share of homeless drug addicts. I quickly realized that wasn't the case, however. The second he saw my truck, he came running towards me, clearly not looking to hurt me but rather for me to save him. When he was still a few yards away, I was going to open my window to ask what was wrong when suddenly I saw a second person run out of the bushes. This time it was a woman. Her t-shirt was torn and dirty. Her legs scratched from running through the bushes without pants on. I was confused to say the least, but the confusion quickly turned to anxiety when I saw she was carrying a large knife. Obviously, this is what the man was running from. He didn't seem to notice her at first, so I motioned to the passenger door, hoping he would get it so we could drive off and call the police before she got too close. As I was motioning to him was when he spotted her. He looked me in the eyes, and I could tell he knew he should run to the truck, but I watched as the panic overtook him, and he ran. The woman chased after, both heading across the road down into the brush towards the lake. I drove off to the park ranger station and called the police. I could hear the echoes of the man's screaming and the woman's yelling. I talked to the police after they handled the situation. The man had been stabbed, but he would live. I went home, obviously shaken. 2 months after that, I was driving the truck through the campground and I saw what looked like a military-style duffel bag hanging from a tree. The closer I got, the more definition the shape took. By the time I was at the campsite, I already had the police on the phone. I could hear the wife sleeping in the tent, but I decided I would let the police wake her and inform her that her husband had hanged himself. I never worked the night shift again. I thought if I worked strictly during the day on the boat dock, all this would stop. I was wrong. I did work an entire summer without incident, but it was in the winter that it happened. It was a cold winter, by San Diego standards at least. Many times my shift would start before the sunrise, having to get the boats ready for all the fishermen coming in the early morning hours trying for trout. On one particular morning, I got to work around 5 a.m. It was cold, in the mid-30s, with frost still on the ground. I walked straight onto the dock and into the shed we used as a workshop. Most of the mornings, the only employees at the park were me, a young woman who worked the concession stand, and a park ranger. Often the park ranger would come down to the dock about 20 minutes into my shift to make sure I had everything I needed. On this morning, I was inside the workshop with the door closed, space heater on, and was working on a broken motor. I could tell when another person walked onto the dock because it would make the whole dock bob slightly in the water. I felt the dock rise and fall beneath my feet and kept at my work, assuming it was just the ranger. I could tell the footsteps went up to the door, paused for a second, then continued towards the end of the dock. After about 5 minutes, without feeling the footsteps return, I opened the door to see what the ranger was up to. I looked to the end of the dock and no one was there. I assumed I must have mistaken the slight waves of the water for footsteps, but noticed the water was smooth as glass and that all the boats were tied up. I took a step out of the shop to get a better look and could hear the crunch of frost under my feet. When I looked down, I noticed that there were two sets of footprints. One was mine, going from the shore straight to the shop. The second went past the shop, down the edge of the dock, and stopped. There were no prints going off the dock. I turned and saw the ranger walking towards the dock down the shore. I quit once he got within earshot.
I haven't really heard many stories of Native American skinwalkers, so I thought I would share my experience. My sighting happened in the summer of 2007 when I was working the night shift at a surface coal mining facility. I used to drive a coal hauling truck which was pretty huge and required a series of steps just to climb into the cab. I just completed my pre-shift inspection and I noticed that my radiator was leaking. I called my supervisor and he asked me to drive the truck to the shop. The shop was about 6 miles to the north from the coal pits, which was located in a remote part of the Navajo reservation. I drove the truck to the shop, called the shop foreman, and the radio requested that I park the truck at the south side of the shop. I parked the truck and I lowered the ladder and I descended the ladder. I wanted to see how much fluid was left in the radiator. So I lowered the rear ladder and climbed into the engine compartment. The leak was pretty bad, so I climbed down the ladder, and that is when I saw the Skinwalker. It was the weirdest thing that I've ever seen. I saw it was about 200 feet from me. It was walking around the other mining equipment. It looked like a huge dog. The fur was beige in color and it walked on all 4 legs. The coat was pretty patchy, missing clumps of fur and bald spots. It smelled really bad, like a rotting roadside corpse. It had seen me and started to walk towards me. I pulled out my flashlight and I noticed that the dog's eyes did not reflect any light. Its eyes were black and lifeless. Its head made a bobbing motion. And it was walking towards me. Its head was huge. It looked like a bull mastiff, which was my first impression. I initially thought, this is a huge dog and it's probably sick and hungry. It got to within 20 feet of me and I pulled out my pocket knife. I was ready to defend myself if this thing wanted to attack. I started to walk carefully towards the shop and I kept my eyes on the creature. It followed me, paralleling my every step. Its walk wasn't natural and fluid like a normal dog. It moved in an unnatural way. I walked about 150 yards to the shop and it kept its distance. I finally got to the shop and the Skinwalker stopped at the driveway of the shop bay doors. I went inside and I told the shop foreman to come see this weird-looking dog. And we both went outside to see it walk away from the shop and turn around the corner of the building. A few seconds later, my supervisor drove around that very corner and I asked him if he had seen that weird-looking animal. He said that he didn't see it. I told him that he had to have seen it. He drove in the very direction that it walked off towards. I described what I had seen and my supervisor said that it was a Skinwalker. That night, my supervisor made me ride with him throughout the rest of the night shift. He opened me up to a world and told me of his experiences while he worked at the mine. I haven't had any more experiences since that encounter, but I've seen mysterious lights around the mining area that didn't make any noises.
A couple years ago, I spent the summer fighting wildfires in southern Oregon. My crew was on a particularly large fire and an unfortunate series of events landed us on night shift. On one of those nights we were posted up near the top of a ridge as the fire was burning slowly up towards us from a valley below. The fire was a good half-mile away, so there wasn't much for us to do besides wait. We broke into groups of 2 and spread out over a large stretch of road and hunkered down for the night. My partner got bored of sitting around, so he decided to hike over and check in on the groups on either side of us. The next thing I remember is waking up at the start. It was dead quiet and the air was incredibly still. Some thick smoke had settled in around us and was messing with the bright moonlight. It's hard to describe, the light was bouncing around the smoke so it appeared relatively bright. But it was smoke, so you still can't see more than 10 or 20 feet in front of you. Anyways, I woke up in this dead silent, still, eerie night. I immediately knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite place it. I tried, but I couldn't get myself to relax. I was looking around, trying to peer through the smoke at anything that could have woken me up. About 30 seconds after waking up I heard a stick snapping nearby. Instant sphincter clencher. I sat straight up, switched on my headlamp to try and look around. Of course, the headlamp didn't do much to illuminate anything besides smoke. After a couple of minutes of frantically looking around and not seeing or hearing anything, I started to relax a bit and switched off my headlamp and leaned back. At this point, I was starting to think that the setting was too perfect for my crew to not be messing with me. Besides, animals don't like smoke, so they usually aren't around fires. about to start laughing at myself for being so jumpy over nothing and yelling that they weren't going to scare me this time. Just then, I heard another crack. A lot closer this time, about 20 feet away. I instantly knew this wasn't anyone in my crew. It was too silent that night for anyone to be able to sneak up on me like that, especially as freaked out as I was a couple minutes ago trying to find the source of the initial stick breaking. I jumped right up, tool in hand, and looked in the direction of the snap. Then I saw it, about 20 feet away, a silhouette. Easily distinguishable from the trees. There were no branches on this silhouette. Not to mention, it wasn't there in my previous scans. What I did see though was a definite head sitting on top of a neck on top of broad shoulders standing about 7.5 feet tall. But it also had eyes. Big eyes that were glinting a bit from the moonlight. Needless to say, I turned and hightailed it back to the road and then down the road until I found some other people from my crew. I talked to the people who were around me and none of them saw or heard anything the rest of the night or any other night we were on top of that ridge. But I know what I saw and it wasn't human and it absolutely scared me. Was it a Sasquatch? I believe so.
Something happened last summer that has left me with many questions and few answers. I was employed at an appliance and furniture rental and sales business in Great Bend, Kansas. One morning a coworker and I opened the store. When we arrived we noticed that the back door was open and when we entered the back room all the lights in the store had been turned on. It didn't look like a break-in because the security latch was intact. The security system had been disabled, there was no power indicator on the code box. We immediately called the police and the store manager to report the situation. We were told not to open the store and to remain in the back office until someone arrived. A few minutes later, after hanging up the phone with the store manager, a police officer was knocking on the back door. I left him in and told him what we had found when we arrived. The officer started to walk through the back room and into the showroom when we started to hear a baby cry. I thought that a customer may have somehow entered the store and that they had a baby with them. My coworker and I followed the officer in the direction of the crying. Well, I didn't believe what I saw. There were 2 babies lying on a twin-size bed display. The officer told us to stay there while he checked the rest of the store. He had also radioed for another police officer to come to the location. I looked down at the babies who were both tightly wrapped in dark green cloth. Both babies were quiet, very still and looking at me and my coworker. I was taken aback by their odd eyes. Both babies had large pupils that were black. There were no irises and neither of the babies blinked. The police officer was soon back with us. He commented on the baby's eyes as well. In fact, he was totally freaked out, so much so that he looked scared. The store manager soon arrived as well as a senior police officer. We all stood around the bed looking at these strange babies who laid there quietly watching us. The store manager pulled my coworker and I to the side and told us to go ahead and leave. He was not opening the store until he found out what was going on. We quickly headed toward the back door and left. I wasn't scheduled to work until a couple days later, but I had talked to a few coworkers who said that the atmosphere in the store was very strange. They had been receiving weird telephone calls and that the security system alarm would trip on several times during the day. I got to work a little early for my next scheduled shift. When I arrived, the store manager was sitting in the office, so I asked him what had happened after we had left. He said that 2 young women, who said they were from the municipal court, eventually showed up and took the babies. The senior police officer told him later that he had no idea who the women were, but that he was told by his superior not to impede. He thought they were probably from McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita. He also said that the babies were very quiet and seemed relaxed the entire period that they were there. I stopped working there not long after. Things were just never the same and it got tougher each day, especially when odd-looking people would come into the store and just walk around. I didn't feel comfortable being there.
It was fall of 1998. I suddenly found myself separated from my husband and with 2 preteen children to support. Living in a small Kansas town, there were very limited employment options. I needed to remain close to home to attempt to keep a handle on preteen adolescents and still keep a roof over our heads. It was convenient when I saw an ad for workers at our local Walmart. The store was converting to a superstore and needed staff 24/7. So I applied. I got hired on as a department manager. I got dug in. I laid out the department, and everything on the shelves on the day of the opening, including the shelves themselves, was put there by my 2 hands. The new store opened and school had started, so I tried to keep my hours mostly to accommodate that, but weekend work was mandatory. Usually I got to work early, there was only light register staff, and I'd be the first department manager on the floor. It was early days for the new store, but the majority of the setup crew had departed the job site. One morning I arrived even earlier than usual. I had timed in and was just about to leave the freight room when a young boy, about the age of my own 2 kids, rushed past me, nearly knocking me over. He started sputtering something about how his ID had been lost and he had to see CCTV to see who picked it up. The first thing weird about this is that I didn't know this kid. My kids grew up in this town, and being a small town, I thought I knew all the kids from town and all parts around. The second weird thing was, back in 1998, it would be very unusual for any small town preteen to have an ID of any kind. I told him I knew nothing about it, but he could follow me back to the office to inquire. There was only one lady back in the office. She was a member of the setup team and had been responsible for hiring me. I left him with her after a short explanation and went out on the floor to begin my day. But I forgot my scanner, so I turned heel and went back into the office area to get one. Immediately I could hear this kid becoming very aggressive with my co-worker. He was ranting on, insisting that he view the CCTV tape immediately. The human resource officer was trying to calmly explain to him that only security staff and the store manager could view it, and she would pass on his concern. Worried about my coworker's safety, I crept closer to the door, which remained open. His back was to me, but looking past him I could clearly see her whitened, shocked face. The boy, sensing my presence, swung around and stormed past me and I assume flew out of the building.
Did you see his eyes? Did you see his eyes?
Though in fact I said nothing. I think I was basically gobsmacked, and as it turned out, I never again spoke to her. That was the last time I saw her. When I inquired after her, I was told she was transferred, though others whispered she had been fired by the home office. The third weird thing was that I was told if I look into the eye of a snake, then I would know what she saw as the boy fled by me.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.